Welcome to this policy event for EU Green Week 2022, hosted by the Nature Conservancy in partnership with EURACTIV. I'm Brian Maguire. Our theme today is accelerating renewable energies in Europe, how to ensure a win-win for climate and biodiversity. We want you to participate today. Send your questions in the chat section. We'll bring those to our panelists a little bit later on. And you don't have to wait until you see the panel. If you have questions burning within you, send them right now and we'll get those organised for the panel later on as well. We really hope to hear from you throughout the programme as well. Now, the programme today focuses on the European Commission's RePowerEU plan, which proposes a massive acceleration of renewable energy to boost energy independence in Europe and decarbonisation, and also to help reduce prices over time. The Commission proposes to increase the headline 2030 target for renewables from 40% to 45% under the Fit for 55 package. As the focus turns to how RePowerEU can be successfully implemented, some are concerned about a new clause to recognise renewable energy as an overriding public interest and are warning against introducing a blank cheque for investments that could potentially undermine wildlife and biodiversity. This event will examine how RePowerEU plans could be implemented in ways that ensure a win-win for both climate and biodiversity. We'll look at the role of science and data, how to achieve this, and we'll draw on existing examples to explore how best practice in renewable energy siting could be strengthened and scaled up in Europe to help make RePowerEU a tremendous success. Now, to introduce this morning our keynote video message from Mr. Mario Šileg, State Secretary at the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development of Croatia. We're very pleased he was able to send this.
Dear colleagues, in the context of the triple crisis, biodiversity loss, climate change and the energy deficiency aggravated by the aggression of Ukraine, the achievements of the goal of ecological transition as well as the energy independence are crucial for our survival and long-term sustainability of our economies. The process of turning to renewable energy sources is enhanced by our ambition for climate neutrality by 2050, and nowadays catalyzed by the necessity to decrease our dependence on the energy coming from Russia. Nevertheless, this process must not be above our ambition to improve and conserve nature. Croatia, as a Mediterranean EU member state, has enormous solar and wind potential. However, at the same time, we have the responsibility to conserve and improve the state of our unique nature. It is one of the European and global biodiversity hotspots and a country with one of the highest share of Natura 2000 sites, covering 37% of its territory. Croatia is committed to tackle both climate and biodiversity crises. Currently, we have 31% share of renewable energy, and we set ambitious goals to increase by 2030. The challenge is to enhance the capacity of renewable sources and, on the other hand, to improve and conserve biodiversity in the same area. The government of the Republic of Croatia was among the first in Europe to recognize the need to mainstream biodiversity into the renewable energy planning. We have witnessed difficulties in this process, with numerous investors proposing solar and wind projects in some of the most sensitive biodiversity areas. This is why we recognized the need to be the pioneers of cross-sectoral cooperation, and we defined development of sensitivity map for birds and bats on national level as one of the measures of integrated climate energy plan and the energy development strategy until 2030. This should significantly raise the quality of spatial planning as a natural friendly and depict suitable space for the development of wind and solar renewables. At the same time, the negative impact of nature should be minimized. We have teamed up with our local experts at the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar, as well as with international experts within the Nature Conservancy, to produce sensitivity maps for key species vulnerable to impact of solar and onshore wind. We are starting to jointly work on a modeling tool that will facilitate and speed up future decision-making on renewables in our country. We will work with these renewed experts to develop tools that will be owned by the government, and we will receive appropriate training to be able to run and maintain this tool independently. In light of the RePowerEU communication and the need to identify go-to areas for renewables, we hope our work will be inspiration to other member states to follow our example. To conclude, aggression on Ukraine and resulting energy crisis in EU has shown that we have to boost green transition. I thank you all for your time and invite our colleagues from Energy Institute and TNC to tell you about their pilot work, upon which our cooperation is building on. Thank you, and I wish you all a productive discussion.
Our thanks to State Secretary Šilek for his contribution this morning. And as he said, we're now going to hear a short presentation on nature-friendly renewable energy mapping, which is informed by the latest research of the Croatian Energy Institute, the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar, and the Nature Conservancy. To present this morning, we have two speakers. The first of which is Igor Vinovic. He's the Southeast Europe Conservation Program. And from Zelja Fistrek, she's the senior researcher at the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar in Croatia also as well. Igor, Zelja, great to have you with us today. And I'll leave the floor to you, and we'll follow up afterwards with you as well. And just after we hear the presentation, we'll introduce the rest of the panel as well. Zelja, Igor, over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks everyone for joining this event. We have a very kind of good introduction by Mr. Mario Šilek from the ministry. So I think I'll just do a little bit more of framing of the discussion, and then we can move to the technical details of the actual energy siting study that was done in Croatia. So just briefly about the Nature Conservancy on the next slide. That's basically TNC, or the Nature Conservancy, is a global environmental NGO headquartered in the US. We have our presence around the world, over 70 countries, and what's actually probably the most important part here is that we have 400 scientists on board, so in-house expertise to bring state-of-the-art conservation science to work for the public interest. The mission of TNC is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. So it's a wide mission that encompasses both biodiversity and climate goals. So on the next slide, you can see this is our ambition to resolve both crises at the same time and find win-win solutions to get us to overcome this crisis. This translates to the objectives, which are on the next slide, which are both in terms of CO2 emission reductions and also conservation of large areas of land, which means translates also to biodiversity protection. So on the next slide, you will see basically how these two crises, where they're coming together, and that's basically the issue that to achieve the climate goals, to achieve the Paris Agreement goals, we need to build more renewables, and we need to do it quickly. But these renewables, wind and solar primarily, are requiring a lot of land. And because they are requiring a lot of land, there's an increased possibility or increased risk that there will be a different conflict. So that renewable energy development could go potentially to the high biodiversity areas, or potentially could also conflict with other land uses like agriculture or tourism, for instance. So there's a risk that we will jeopardize our biodiversity goals, but then there's another risk that this will slow down the progress of renewable energy development, because projects will be delayed if there are conflicts and if there are, for instance, lawsuits from the environmental organizations which relate to the biodiversity impacts. But we think in TNC think there's a solution. So on the next slide, it's a scheme of this renewable energy siting that we are proposing, that is including both the development potential and environmental considerations. From one side, we are mapping the renewable energy potential, including resource availability like solar irradiation, like wind speed, but also proximity of the grid or proximity of the load centers of the places where the electricity will be consumed. But on the other hand, environmental considerations. So we are making sensitivity maps for species that are sensitive, or maps of other potential social impacts, like high quality agricultural land which shouldn't be used for solar. When these two layers are overlaid, ideally we get to the zones that are high resource availability but low impact in terms of environmental and social impacts. And this could translate to the go-to zones that are now mentioned in the RePowerEU communication. And these go-to zones could potentially also then have some easier permitting process. This needs to be done early to avoid as much as possible conflicts. And what's also important is there's a wide stakeholder engagement process, that everybody is involved in designating these areas so that there are less problems later. The Nature Conservancy work on this in the US. We call it site renewables right approach. We do it in India. And in Europe, we chose Southeast Europe as a place where there's a high biodiversity value. It's a hotspot, biodiversity hotspot globally and in Europe, but also high renewable energy potential. So we decided to work with the local expertise, with the Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar, and now I'll invite Željka Fištrek to show us a bit how it was done in concrete example in one of the counties of Croatia.
Thank you, Igor, for this introduction. At the beginning, I would just like to say a few words about the institution I'm coming from. That's Energy Institute Hrvoje Požar, which is founded by the government of Republic of Croatia, and we provide different services and professional support in the field of energy, from planning to transmission to renewable energy sources, climate efficiency. And our clients include public authorities, national and international organizations, but also to a great extent a private sector. So we kind of know the problems of all of them. So in the collaboration with TNC, guided by mutual goals, we have started this pilot project for Zadar County, but with an idea to apply this approach later on national scale. And we are very happy and proud that the Croatian government and the ministry have recognized our approach and our efforts, and that we are scaling up this to a higher level. Why Zadar County? So it's just one of the 20 counties in Croatia. However, it's first of all, it's very rich in natural potential, both for solar and wind. Secondly, this was recognized by investors, so there is quite a large interest in development of projects in this county. And thirdly, as Secretary Šiljeg said, Croatia is very rich in biodiversity. It's a very biodiverse country, and Zadar County is one of those counties which quite significant areas of protected areas, Natura 2000, sensitive habitats and species. So that makes it really interesting for a pilot project, because it's very vulnerable to development of projects. So the aim of our pilot project was to define the methodology for development of wind and solar sensitivity maps. And the potential application of our results of the maps as we saw it was first of all to kind of provide support to spatial planners in development of zones for wind and solar, then also to support the relevant institutions that are involved in environmental impact assessments and strategic assessments, to kind of provide additional data that can guide them in case of they need some more details, and also to provide information to developers so that they are aware, for example, if they have a certain project in a certain area and they want to know how complicated the permitting procedure be, that they can take a look and already get some kind of idea of the possible problems that they can encounter based on area sensitivity. So on the next slide, I will shortly describe the project approach, like the formation of the methodology. So what we did at the same beginning is the kind of to go through literature review and identify already existing approaches and try to take the best from them, including the one that Igor mentioned from TNC. That was quite a big inspiration for us. Then we took a look into the data available. So here is one important, let's say, thing is that the availability of data. This will really define the quality of our final product. So sometimes data are available, sometimes for some cases they are not. So we need to kind of to balance this and form the indicators based on the data available and also their quality. So we took an indicator-based approach and we formed the indicators in such way that they reflect the sensitivity of a certain technology. One really important task was stakeholder consultation. So we consulted relevant public authorities, the experts in certain fields, and also NGOs. And based on their input, we adapted certain parts of our methodology and also the indicators. So on the next slide, you can see how we took a three-step approach. And the final result was a map with 5 levels of sensitivity. So first, in the first step, we identify areas under legal protection where no projects can be developed, and we label these as exclusion zones. We also included here areas that are already developed, where of course no further development can happen, like for example, cities. So we are talking here about larger non-integrated power plants, not like the small on the roof. Then the second step was identification of areas with potentially very high vulnerability. This was based on the precautionary principle, and so we labeled them very high sensitivity areas. And the third and the final step was sensitivity evaluation of remaining area, which was based on a multi-criteria analysis using already mentioned indicators. And we addressed 3 categories: biodiversity, natural resources, and socioeconomic aspects. So in each of these categories, we had several indicators describing them. And we had here 3 levels of sensitivity. On the next slide, you can see how this process went in reality. So we did this in QGIS. Some of the levels had, maybe like 13, 15 different layers that we needed to overlap, that we needed to combine. In the case of results from multi-criteria analysis, we needed to calculate in order to get the final sensitivity. So the message is that it was quite time-consuming process. So the result is shown on the next slide. This is shown only for solar power plants, where we have a sensitivity map for Zadar County area, where these brown fields, they are exclusion zones. Then the dark red are very high sensitivity zones, and these other areas from darker orange to yellow are very high, are very sensitive, medium sensitive, and low sensitive areas. We also constructed a map of suitability, because we also want to know which areas are suitable. So we included here only 2 parameters, and that's the slope and solar radiation, even though it's possible to include more. And we got this map. So at the end, the final product that we wanted to see is, where, what is important for us. So it's important, where the suitable areas, which are also low sensitivity areas, because these areas, it's the probability of kind of a significant effect on natural resources, on biodiversity, and on socioeconomic aspects is kind of like the smallest, but still there are technical conditions for solar power plant development. So we identified the areas that you can see on this image, and basically we came to a number of 22,500 hectares, but under assumption that not all of this area will be available for development of solar power plants, because there are other also uses to area. We took 5%, and still with even 5% of this area, we can still develop 555 megawatts of installed solar power plants, which is quite a significant potential. So I would conclude here on this methodology, and just allow Igor to present, the final conclusions.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll just be brief. There are 2 more slides. I want to show you just kind of zoom out a bit now from this small county to Croatia and to Europe, how this translates and how this compares to objectives for expanding renewables in Croatia. So basically, these bluish areas that you've seen for wind and solar together have a potential. It's an estimate, but it's a potential of over half of the Croatia's current 2030 target. So this could be a bit more potentially now with the new policies coming in. And in terms of consumption, this is probably it's estimated that it could power up. This area can power up 1/3 of Croatian households. This is something which is a significant contribution, given that this is only 7% of Croatia's land territory. So it's a big potential there. What's next? That's on the next slide. It's expanding the study to the whole of Croatia, or to the national level, and this is where we are very pleased that we have a support from the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. We will collaborate in the next year to build similar maps for Croatia, for solar for the whole country, and for wind for the whole coastal area, which is the most important for development of wind. And this all fits in very neatly into the national policy processes, like the implementation of the National Energy and Climate Plan, biodiversity strategy, but now with this new RePowerEU process, probably can also fit into the process of establishing go-to areas for renewables. We always think there's a need to, or there's a space to improve. So there's a space to improve the data. We can go with the increased resolution, because we want to get as much as possible to the level of the projects. And there's always a need to also update and maintain the information, which we hope we can be able to build a successful model with the Croatian government using their own data management systems. With this, I would end, and I would just at the last slide, you can see the resources. There's a full report, technical report. There's a briefing paper, some opinion piece that you can read about this project, and you can of course contact Željka and me for any additional questions. And I'm expecting also questions now during the discussion. So thank you everyone for the attention.
Igor, Željka, thank you so much for that. Just to let you know that Igor and Željka will stay with us and they'll rejoin us for questions. If you want to address a specific question to either of them, please put that in the chat and put their name beside it as well. We'll bring it to them directly. I'm going to introduce the rest of the panel now. They're going to speak for about 60 seconds, just their elevator pitch, their key remarks, and we'll begin the discussion. But send your questions now, or your comments as well, your remarks. If you can keep them short. If you can tell us who you are and where you're from, that'll be useful for us as well, just to give some context. So let me introduce the rest of the panel now. We have with us Jeremy Zeitung. He's the attaché ONG for the government of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. Great to have you with us. Grégoire Dubois, project leader at the Knowledge Centre for Biodiversity of the European Commission Joint Research Centre. Diana Paolo Garcin, she's European Renewables Program at EURACTIV. And Noor Yafai, Europe Director for Global Policy and Institutional Partnerships at the Nature Conservancy. Great to have all of you with us. Thanks for taking the time to be here. Let's start with Jeremy. 60 seconds just to hear your key remarks for today. Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much, TNC, for organizing this event. Very timely in light of the new RePowerEU proposals. So my name is Jeremy. I represent the government of Luxembourg, dealing with European affairs in the field of energy. And just to start with a couple of words about Luxembourg. It's a small country, 600,000 inhabitants, 2,500 square kilometers. We have 25% renewables as an objective in our NECP for 2030. So very densely populated country, highly protected. 52% of our national territory is Natura 2000 protected. 1/3 of our territory is covered with forests. So we're facing exactly the challenge Igor described earlier. We have ambitions for climate with renewables installations that should be accelerated. We need land. We have little land. There is conflict of usage. And we are also facing regulatory obstacles that we need to remove to make this happen. So these challenges you identified, Igor, are shared. And in order to address them, what we're trying to do is to focus on agri-PV. And I can tell you a few words about that later on in the discussion. But the idea is to establish pilot projects with farmers so that we all together identify the most suitable zones for PV deployment, and we preserve the value of the soil, the ecological value of the soil, and the revenues of the farmers while increasing renewables deployments. So we'll revert probably back to that a little bit later. But I'm very happy to be here and to contribute to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Jeremy, thank you so much. And over to Gregoire, 60 seconds for you.
Yes, hello everyone from Ispra, Italy, working at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, the in-house science service of the European Commission. This was an exciting presentation, not so much because of the tools that are complex, but because of the process. I mean, the real challenge is to bringing all these different stakeholders, and the challenge is huge, and Igor stressed that. It's not only about the conservation sector and energy, but it's also about agriculture, transport, tourism. So how can we bring all the stakeholders together to take decisions together? That's the real challenge. Spatial planning will be key to the implementation of the Green Deal. We are supposed to cover 30% of our land and seas with conservation areas. They need to be effectively managed. How are we going to do that? It's going to be a massive endeavor. We need to access good and open access biodiversity data. It's not only about the boundaries of existing project areas, but we need to plan already for new areas. And we need to have also information that is very often not available in maps, like ecological corridors, flyways. They all need to be accessible, openly accessible, as well as the tools to really do this spatial planning together. And we need also to think beyond the boundaries. We have biodiversity hotspots in Croatia, but it's available. I mean, it's a hotspot for the whole of the Mediterranean area. So huge challenges, but exciting work that was presented here this morning. Thank you for that.
Gregoire, thank you so much. Diana Paolo, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here and represent EURACTIV. We are the European Association representing the electricity sector across Europe. And actually, it's very exciting to be here because I can, from everything that has been said, we can only agree with the fact that we have challenges and we need to break silos. We need to work together and bring everyone to the table to develop integrated approaches towards renewables deployment. Now, as EURACTIV, of course, we support the ambitious target for renewables deployment, but we need accelerated permitting. Permitting is a huge barrier now for the electricity sector. And if we are to tackle the climate change crisis, that will actually become the leading reason for biodiversity loss by mid-century, then we need to deploy massively renewables. At EURACTIV, we're working on an approach that is positive for biodiversity and for renewable energy deployment. This is the power plant project that we will launch at the Power Summit on the 16th of June. And I'm happy to discuss about it later on in the panel.
Thank you so much. And Noor, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here from the Nature Conservancy to complement what you heard from my colleague Igor. Firstly, please let me say we very much support the Commission's recent RePowerEU proposals, especially the proposal to increase the target from 40% to 45% renewables by 2030. This would be a major step forward for implementing the climate law and yet another sign of European global climate leadership in action. We also hope that we'll soon see the EU nature restoration law, which unfortunately has been delayed, but which we and colleagues from industry both recognise is needed to ensure we have both climate and biodiversity win-wins. Now, it's vital that we ensure that member states have full confidence that the increased renewables target can be implemented in ways that meet both climate and biodiversity targets. And that's why the proposal for dedicated go-to areas in RePowerEU is so important. We do need a reliable system to ensure that renewables developers can plan their investments with greater confidence and ensure that they avoid biodiversity sensitive areas. And this is also the approach that we and our teams at the Nature Conservancy have been developing and hope to help expand in Europe in the interest of supporting the implementation of RePowerEU. Using the latest science, as Igor and Zelka explained, we believe you can map out the areas where nature-friendly renewables can be much more quickly deployed. And let me emphasise that this is not a substitute for early consultation with communities. We mustn't forget the role of local people and communities in this, but we do believe that it can more efficiently allow designated pre-approved zones in low impact areas.
No, thank you so much. Thanks to all our panelists for concise introductions. Now, from what I hear, this all comes down to the quality of the data and getting that data together, as we heard from Zelka and from Gregoire in particular as well, is that it comes from the stakeholders. So adapting methodology was one thing that Zelka mentioned as an outcome of the consultation with stakeholders as well. So Gregoire, I just want to ask you in terms of what Nora said here as well, confidence building, on removing bottlenecks to ensure this permitting process can happen more quickly as well. That we need a streamlined approach to achieve these objectives. What's your experience in looking at the data? Is the data convincing for investors? Can we see another step change in this process, Gregoire?
Well, super challenging question. Access to biodiversity data is still a huge challenge. We have been working at the Joint Research Center closely with the Nature Conservancy in developing the web-based tools accessible to all to really do this spatial planning. But one thing is having access to the methods and the tools. The other one is really having access to the data. The data have notoriously been managed by NGOs and very little and not frequently by governments. So this is where we need really to bring the industry together, the governments, the NGOs, even the citizen science, who are bringing a lot of data, but it's all very fragmented. So we need to challenge this fragmentation of the information, making sure that this information is accessible to all, it's curated, it's managed properly. This is an enormous challenge. And we need, again, to think beyond the borders. It's not that biodiversity decides to stay within the country. It moves around, it needs to move freely, they migrate. So it's really a collective effort, not only a country one, a European one, it's a global effort. These are challenges that we're also discussing at the Convention on Biodiversity. So this indeed is, for me, one of the biggest challenges that we are still facing, is having a long-term strategy for making this information available freely to and accessible to everyone.
Thank you. Jeremy, just to build on what Gregoire has said, the idea that this is a huge challenge for individual countries, even county councils, for example, as well, bringing together all this data. From the Luxembourg perspective as well, does it matter to you that we have a 27 member state approach, or can we go on an individual approach with this? Is this time for a European consolidation on this project to make the permitting process easier for investors, where this mapping is done at an EU level and not just an ad hoc basis by individual countries and regions?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, and there is indeed a lot of focus on permitting. And I fully concur with the fact that we have more to do in terms of data sharing and access to data and reduce time delivery for permits. However, that's really, on my perspective, not the biggest reason explaining the very long lead time of renewable energy projects. And one of the very important reasons is the legal lawsuits that we experience based on the different projects. And in the end, even if we solve or accelerate critically, and we need to do that, I'm not challenging that, we need to do that, but even if we critically accelerate permit delivery, if we reduce from 2 years to 1 year, it's already a gain, of course. But if afterwards we are facing 5, 6, 7 years of legal lawsuits and appeals and all that, even the acceleration of the permitting is not really solving the issue. It's only partly solving the issue, and the way to address the legal risk and to reduce litigation and to eventually reduce lead time of projects to be implemented is really the early involvement of local communities. So permitting, yes, and we're trying to improve that, but on top of addressing the permitting issue, we absolutely need to have early involvement of local communities, not just inhabitants, but also economic actors, so that thanks to their early involvement and the zoning approach and all that, it ultimately reduces litigation risk and speeds up the project completion.
Thank you. Dan, I bring you back in. You wanted to remark on this also.
Yes, thank you, Brian. I just wanted to point the fact that actually when it comes to data access, okay, it's very important, but what is also important is to have key performance indicators. So basically everyone reporting on specific indicators that can afterwards be analyzed at member state level, but also at European level. So actually we know where are the problems, or where is the progress, if there is any progress, and if the legislation is implemented. So the monitoring part, the reporting part is very important if we want to accelerate permitting. And then this is where digitalization comes in. We have to digitalize the permitting procedures. This will help us to collect the necessary data that will afterwards improve our assessments and improve the recommendations we can actually make to member states and to local authorities that in most of the cases do have to actually issue these permits. And to complement what Jeremy was saying, of course, early involvement of communities is important, but also it's important to break the silos, to look at spaces that are already built and see how we can actually use those spaces to deploy renewable energy. We have, he mentioned agrivoltaics. That's an extraordinary way of looking at how agriculture and energy sector can work together. We see now in the solar strategy references to the transport infrastructure, also floating PVs. So all these new ways of using spaces and multi-use of spaces have to be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, I just follow up. What you're describing is not just an approach to permitting, but a project-by-project approach as well for investment. Floating PV is very different from anything which you're going to put on land, and certain types of investors are going to be attracted to that, and each has a different risk profile as well. When you look at how your company invests in the future as well, you're not just looking for the good of the environment. You have to return a profit in this too. So, what is it that appeals to companies like yours in terms of how how you approach the risk side of this, but also the longer term return on investment as well? What are the elements that appeal most?
So EURACTIV is representing companies, associations in the electricity sector, and we have indeed leading utilities that look at renewables projects from this integrated perspective. And going forward, probably the most important, one of the most important elements for any project developer would be visibility. So we need visibility, we need the certainty that when you develop a project, when you ask for permission, this is actually going to go smoothly if you respect the rules, if you are, if you're playing by the rules. So I think visibility and certainty of stability of rules is are key for renewables deployment going forward.
Okay, so for your members, there's nothing new in this in terms of investment strategy. It's stability, the predictability, and the long-term visibility of projects. And for that to happen, the data clearly has got to be robust as well. No, you want to add to that?
I was saying
I can't hear you. Yeah, there we go.
Of course, to accelerate renewables investments, we do need to ensure that there is greater investor confidence out there. So fully support the point that Diana was making. What's interesting to reflect on, and I think Jeremy pointed to this, is that at the moment we don't really have one single definition of what best practice for renewable siting could look like in Europe. Do we risk having 27 different approaches, or is it time to actually try to bring stakeholders together to help define what that best practice looks like? And in doing so, work with the industry, with civil society, with local communities and governments to help not only define that, but then perhaps against that, recognise and reward companies and investors that do adopt such best practice and help them roll out nature-friendly renewables much more quickly.
No, for you, what does best practice look like? Is this too broad a concept, or do we have to go project by project and identify similar projects and what best practice looks like there? Or can we have overarching approaches to this as well with benchmarking?
I think it is possible to have overarching approaches to this. I don't think there is any one stakeholder group that has the answer, which is why we need to bring together different views. We heard in the presentation earlier some examples of how data sets and best practice have been put together to work very well in Croatia. I think this is a golden opportunity for the Commission to help facilitate what a definition could look like and to work with the Member States and others to help drive that forward. And I'd be interested to hear from the other panelists on that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll bring it to the panel also in just a second. Diana, for your members as well, the mapping element that we saw earlier as well, just in terms of being able to communicate opportunity, to communicate clearly about what is possible. Does this help organizations like yours communicate the message and accelerate the process as well? Because what we saw was essentially a traffic light system for investment. You can't do it here in the exclusionary zones. You may be able to do it here in these areas, and here are the low impact areas. And in terms of decision making and process, that to me would seem to be an accelerator. How would you see it?
So indeed, it's important to know what are the areas that are particularly suitable for renewables deployment. At the same time, it's very important to take into account also something that is proposed by the Commission, that we need to have sufficient land that is mapped by member states for renewables deployment that is in line with their renewables targets. So important, yes, to have this spatial planning. Important to give visibility, but also very, very important to take into account the fact that, so this is what we discovered through the power plant project that we are developing now, because you were asking whether it's possible to develop it at an industry level or at European level. We are trying to do this with our project. We're trying to bring everyone together and to discuss what would be positive practices and how we could actually bring this together and kind of mainstream them across countries. And it is key that we also take into account that there are projects now that help with biodiversity restoration in areas, and that now can become afterwards a Natura 2000. We have seen such projects in Nordic countries. So what my point is here, that some renewables projects can actually improve or further develop biodiversity. So we should not, by default, consider that now renewables projects do not do this. On the contrary, we should encourage best practices that are already there and acknowledge that some companies are already doing great efforts. And happy to.
Thank you. I think we lost signal there just for a moment. Dan will be back to us in just a second, I'm sure. Jeremy and Gregor, just to follow up on what Noura was talking about as well in terms of best practice, and now being a moment of opportunity for Europe to establish best practice for this approach. What does best practice look like to you, Gregor, in a European context for mapping, for profiling projects, and for driving this agenda for RePowerEU? I can't hear you. Let's see.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Can you
Thank
hear
you.
me? Okay.
Perfectly. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Most important than the tools and the recommendations on exactly what to use is, again, the process. And I think one thing is key to the Commission is to make sure that information is available and that the process is transparent. So again, I'm putting on the table the information of open access in support to decision making. So this is, I think, something very important. Regarding the recommendations, I need to look in the right departments to see what kind of proposals are drafted regarding best practices and recommendations. They need to be general. But for sure, the interactions with all the stakeholders will be key. And now looking at the European dimension, considering the heterogeneity of the spatial distribution of biodiversity, we have biodiversity hotspots in certain areas. So we need to pay attention in certain areas more than in others. So it's really a European challenge to really have a coordination across these different sectors, but also across the countries to have a common strategy. So it's more than only a recommendation for a single site assessment and development. It's really a global and European vision that needs to be implemented to make sure we have proper coordination. I hope you could hear me this time.
Thank you. And not... Yes, no, I got it. It was all perfect. Thank you so much. Jeremy, just to follow up on that, green is always heard with digital attached to it these days as well. And if we're talking about transparency and what we heard earlier as well from Diana, the green and digital age, is this the moment for benchmarking? And should this be a protracted process, or even though we have the heterogeneity of the environment and the differences between member states, that there should be sufficiently robust data in a reasonably transparent way, which allows this process to go forward more quickly without remaining in silos? Jeremy?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I fully agree with that. And contexts are different, but we can always learn from other projects and learn from good practices. And some of the good practices also derived from stakeholders consultation, from listening to people who are actually involved in the deployment of projects. So if I refer back to the agri PV project, a pilot project we are running, how did it really start? We listened to farmers themselves. There was like a general perception amongst farmers that installation of PV would lead to a loss in revenue. That was really one of the concerns that came very prominently because of the loss of available surface due to the installation of the PV panels, and due to the fact that with this additional activities, they may lose extra revenues from support and aid, production support and production aid. So what we did is really to sit together with them and to try to address these concerns by factoring in two elements in the projects we're running. Firstly, there can be no more than 10% loss of available surface. And that was very reassuring for for agricultures, because like I said, they were very concerned with the loss of surface that would entail a loss of revenue. And secondly, we changed the rules so that they would maintain their eligibility to aid. So even if they enter into this agri-PV project and they have extra revenue derived from this installation of PV panels on their land, they would still remain eligible for support based on their primary farming activity. So for that reason, it is something we had not maybe rightly spotted at the very beginning. And by sitting down with them, by establishing together those rules, we kind of came to to this good practice to some extent that could be replicated also elsewhere in other agri-PV projects. So yes, it's all about sharing experience. It's about benefiting from each other's good practices, and yeah, that's probably one of the added values of this event as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for that. And let's go to some of the questions from our audience as well. First one is for Zelka, and this is Julia from WWF. Is Croatia considering to have go-to areas also for hydropower? Zelka.
Well, this was not a scope of our project, so we were not. I cannot say now for the government. I can only say for our project. So I'm not aware if they're considering that. I think that first we will start with solar and wind, and then we will see how this develops.
Okay, thank you. You stay with this. Another question also from Raleigh. Did local stakeholders raise questions about the noise level of installed wind power parks? Zelka.
Well, there has been a questions. For example, I'm actually a biologist working in energy field, so I deal quite a lot with the environmental impact assessments, and this is one of the issues that is addressed there. However, within this project, we had to draw a line at some point, so we couldn't really go into depth with this certain data as you know, noise levels, but we did certain buffers, you know, around the kind of like around certain areas. For example, we included a buffer around settlements to take this in consideration. Also a buffer around let's say some important other areas where people can be found in order to also encompass this. But we didn't do a precise calculations because we didn't have a real project. We just had, you know, a spatial analysis. So yes, this was kind of considered.
All right, thank you. A question for Igor as well. Jeremy from Bioenergy Europe. Is Croatia also considering biomass for energy? Igor.
As far as I know, yes, but what we are focusing, as Željka just mentioned here, is solar and wind, because these are the energy sources which are largely underdeveloped in Croatia, in region. So that's why there was a focus. So again, we are not excluding renewable energy sources. We are kind of agnostic to it in a way, but we are focusing on solar and wind because this is where we see the most potential and most unused potential at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Question is also from Raleigh Kayaste. To all the panelists, and I think this is optimistic, but let's try anyway. Your 5 key indicators you consider most important for nature conservation and environment for the implementation of new solar and wind installations. So your key 5 indicators, I'll take whatever you can give me on this panel. Okay, Jeremy, let's kick off with you. What are your key indicators? Just headlines.
No real key indicator to report, but like in general, the increased ecological value. And ecological is not just about biodiversity, it's also about soil quality, water quality. So there are different sets of indicators that I would place under the heading of ecological value. And I would like just to jump on what Diana said earlier, that indeed we observe that after the installation of some renewable energy projects, the ecological value of the land has increased. Because it's not just about generally what we're running in terms of projects. It's not just the sole installation of PV panels, for example, but it goes with lower usage of pesticides, of re-establishment of hedges that give additional biodiversity options. We can see that under the PV panel there is more humidity and more shade that allows other species to grow which had not grown before. So it's all about the ecological value in general and not just the energy yield in itself. So a broad range of indicators, basically.
Thank you. Gregoire, what would you add to that?
Well, it's the $1 million question. We are all embarked with all the parties of the UN Convention on Biodiversity in deciding and selecting the indicators that will be used to monitor the progress regarding the conservation of biodiversity globally. And this has been a never-ending discussions, and we come up with a whole bunch of indicators, and only a few are really robust. So in the top 5, clearly the uniqueness of the habitats and the threats to which the species are exposed are clearly critical. If you lose one species, there's no way to go back and recover the species. Something that is striking me is that in most of the data set that you will find available, you find data on species, you find data on project areas, maybe even on uniqueness of the ecosystems. What is often lacking are real information on the need to connect these ecosystems and the connectivity, ecological corridors to allow the species to move in our increasing built-up area. So species need to move, they need to migrate. We need to have proper maps to document that, to make sure that these areas remain connected. And this is something that will be key for land use planning.
Okay. Diana, anything to add from your electric side?
Yes, so very quick reflection.
I know it's harder the further down the list you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Perfect. I would say multi-use of spaces, use of digital technologies to monitor habitats, nature, the repurposing of former industrial or degraded lands, and reducing actually degradation itself. For instance, you can through PVs in desertified areas, you can actually restore biodiversity, or with PVs you can prevent evaporation of water and coexistence with other activities.
Thank you. And Nora, anything to add there?
Well, I love the question, and this is normally the sort of question I'd ask to our scientists. Given we have 400 of them in TNC, I think the question and the fact that we're getting different answers from the panelists again shows why we need to have a single definition, and why a single definition of what that looks like, what the best practice, what the indicators that should be taken into account looks like, is really important to complete the picture for RePowerEU. So I would say, let's try to actually build consensus around that. And with that, give both the industry, local communities, member states, the greater confidence they need to really meet this target.
Okay, thank you. Bruno Campos from EURACTIV has sent in a few questions. I like this one in particular. Thank you for that question, by the way, and to all the answers that were given. Bruno asks, says there are already bad examples of how governments missed in connecting at-sea spatial planning with the nature directives, in particular carrying out species-sensitive analysis, sensitivity analysis. How do you ensure member states are doing analysis correctly? Gregoire, you want to have a go at that?
I wouldn't know how to answer that.
No.
It's really a challenge, of course. Again, as I said, information is extremely fragmented, difficult to access, in the hands of very different people, and it's not also the role of the Commission to really double check these kind of things, but to make the information available and use it the best way we can. Of course, when we are speaking about now compliance with the law, that's another issue, of course. But yeah, many challenges.
Okay. I think maybe Luxembourg is not the best qualified to talk about sea planning. So I'll skip this one for you, Jeremy, and bring another question in just a second. Diana, do you have anything to add to that? Is there a sense of what member states could do in terms of their analysis for sea spatial planning?
Well, I think the basic part is to implement the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive and to report on what, so they actually do put forward their plans and monitor the indicators there. So that would be my initial reaction on this. And I probably more detailed guidance from the Commission. I would say that now the technical support instrument that is proposed by the Commission in the RePowerEU communication is very important. So this instrument from now on will also have a stream focusing on permitting and on renewable energy deployment. We supported this and we asked for this as Eurelectric, and we do hope that through this kind of technical support, member states will also manage to improve their practices, because sometimes it's indeed a question of having the right understanding of the legislation. It's not always a question that we don't want to implement it, and or yeah, it's really having the right understanding.
Okay, thank you. Different question from Noor, also from Bruna. Sorry if you prepared an answer for that. Bruna asks, how do you ensure communities are given a voice to challenge projects, especially when they go to areas which are defined incorrectly? How would you answer that? So how do you ensure communities are given a voice to challenge projects?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. So thanks to Bruna for asking it. And this, I think, speaks also to one element of the RePowerEU proposal, which, looking at stakeholder reactions, has already started to prove to be controversial, which is this clause around deciding what's in the overarching public interest. I think early consultation is key, as I said before. Spatial mapping and environmental assessment upfront is not a substitute for early engagement with local communities. And we must listen to local communities. Who gets to decide what's in the overriding public interest? Well, I certainly wouldn't suggest that I have the answer to that. But let me clarify, this is not just about the environment. There are a whole host of other concerns that do get voiced at local levels. And I'm not sure how helpful that language is in terms of trying to build consensus. What we need is less controversy, not more, if we're going to roll out renewables faster. And I think that's one of the reasons why we need to make sure that local communities are involved at every single stage of the process. So I would certainly welcome ideas for how we can ensure that there are the right checks and balances in place to ensure that the aims of RePowerEU are upheld at the same time as ensuring that other societal goals are fully taken into account.
This sounds to me, as Jeremy mentioned earlier as well, that there's a potential series of landmines for litigation if this isn't done properly, Noor. And are you concerned that there's too much opportunity for stakeholders in the early stages to limit the opportunity that's there to achieve energy and from renewables over the medium term? Is it overriding public interest? It's controversial in this context. It's not well defined yet. And this is the kind of thing which could go through the courts for a long time to determine what that actually means. Is this a problematic phrase, Noor, that should be clarified earlier and defined more tightly earlier to give more stability, more clarity for investors?
I mean, personally, I think so, yes. I think, as I said, we need less controversy, not more. And it could be quite a provocative statement, I think, to some. That said, I think there will be lots of healthy debate about this as member states and others consider the proposals and look about how to implement them. I think what's really important is that we do involve all stakeholder groups in this, and it is important that we start to see if we can build the types of partnerships that we haven't seen before, which can break through the barriers that we've seen, long-standing barriers to what have now been problems, old problems, been around for a while. The only way we're going to get through those is if we can forge new partnerships that can look for solutions and see how things can be done differently.
Thank you. Jeremy, Jeremy, this one will bring another question in just after. Jeremy, your own experience of this in Luxembourg, forming those new partnerships, what's different about this process if you go to the consultation earlier? Are there different dynamics to this in terms of other types of public consultation? Is there a sense that the overriding public interest is problematic in Luxembourg?
So generally speaking, I mean, it's still a little bit early to tell about the results, but generally speaking, like the earlier you involve communities, you involve stakeholders, the better you get projects which are solid afterwards, which are not open to litigation, and there is a real change of mindset. I mean, just when you ask people about their opinion, they feel immediately more involved in the project. They feel they develop slowly ownership about the project. So it's not just about a box you're ticking or a standard consultation you're running just for the sake of saying, okay, I consulted and then I go around with my project, whatever happens. But it really, you can see that it really develops this sense of ownership, and that makes the whole project very very different and much more likely to succeed, and likely to succeed within a more reasonable time. To jump on the public interest,
go ahead.
Very, very quickly, if you allow me, Brian, just 1 second. I look at it at first glance a little bit more positively than you do more at this very stage. I mean, I concur with you on the fact that it would need legal clarity to avoid that it's interpreted in a way we don't want, or that it's opening the door to challenges that we don't want to see. But at first glance, we see, I mean, I see that a little bit more positively in the sense that it would allow those projects to be considered as infrastructure projects, which are vital for the achievement of our climate goals, and that would allow maybe to address some of the permit delivery issues that we're facing by accelerating the procedure. So it can also be, if it's well done, I really think it can be an accelerator rather than a thing that would break on the pace of project development. Okay,
thank you. There's another quick question from Florian Graber, Florence University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. And this is to the panel. I think maybe Igor and Zilka could have a go at this first, and maybe a couple of quick reactions as well from the rest of the panel. In your opinion, is it really possible to reliably map areas as suitable for RE projects, taking into account the current EU habitats, such as birds directives, and the fact that protected species such as birds tend to migrate, which is something Gregoire touched on earlier as well. Igor, Zilka.
I think this is more for Željka, a bit technical.
Okay. Yes, so it's extremely difficult, but we understand the certain limitations. And for example, we do not, when we were doing the pilot projects, we didn't have information for flyways. It just doesn't exist. Also, like the detailed information on species distribution. However, we are aware of the limitation of data, but we are trying to do as best as possible with the data we have. And the idea for the lifting up this at the national level is also to do species modeling, distribution modeling, to kind of get better information. So our approach here was, precautionary. So in this pilot, we emphasize that this is not, that we are claiming that, this is area where you can really now at this moment build the power plant. It's just that there is less probability that they will have some serious impact on biodiversity.
Okay, Igor, anything to add there, just quickly?
No, just what Željka said, that when we are going to upscale this study to Croatia, so to the level of the member state, we are going to use maybe a bit more sophisticated modeling, and TNC is going to provide that know-how for the Croatian government for the species distribution modeling. So it's a kind of proxy to try to assess impact on sensitive species when there is not all the data that we need. So I think we are trying to do as much as possible with the current data, and this is something we will need to take into account, that it's not anytime soon, it's not going to be perfect with data. So we need to find ways to kind of assess risk as much as possible with the data available.
Thank you. And just before we start our wrap-up, Gregoire, I want to ask just a follow-up to that as well. In terms of how the European Commission supports data and the JRC, Gregoire, the idea that we need harmonized approach, but we need more investment in quality data all the way through. Is this something we're going to see more of a European approach to?
I'm convinced about that. I think we have no choice. I mean, my role as the manager of the Noise Center for Biodiversity is more to interact with all possible stakeholders. So energy is one of the sectors, but we are dealing with trade, we are dealing with all possible policies, with agriculture and so on. So data is key. We always say you cannot manage what you cannot, if you cannot measure it. So the data will be key, and this is where we have been lacking globally, really investments. It's having data accessible to everyone. And one step here would be very useful, would be to map no-go areas first, so that we already can focus or exclude certain areas for any kind of activity, to make sure that the key areas for biodiversity are conserved and managed for the future. But there's a lot to do, and I'm sure that the Commission definitely is investing in that.
Okay, thank you. And now just for our panel, 30 seconds, your soundbite to wrap up today. Jeremy, let's kick off with you. Key message for today.
Yeah, I'd like to react now to the no-go approach, and there were a few speakers who mentioned let's move from the no-go area to the go-to area, and to broaden a little bit the perspective. It's not just about biodiversity and environment, but we figure out in Luxembourg that there are very old regulations that prevent windmills, for example, wind turbines from being installed less than 1 kilometer from a highway. It's a legacy from the past when we were scared that wind turbines would fall on a highway. So there is a lot of things to clean in the approach to siting and permitting, which are, of course, on biodiversity, but much broader also on the whole barriers and obstacles that we need to remove. And maybe last thought, to conclude from my side, we have loads of examples where renewables and ecological value, biodiversity, soil quality, water quality go hand in hand in harmony. So there is no reason to oppose the climate objectives and the biodiversity protection objectives. They can really go well hand in hand, and many projects show co-benefits on both fronts of these two elements.
Okay, thank you. Dana, 30 seconds.
I can totally actually support what Jeremy just said. Climate change and biodiversity loss must be tackled together. We don't have the time to, and it's not actually efficient to tackle or possible to tackle them separately. For this, we need an integrated approach towards renewable energy deployment. And we want to do that in the electricity sector. We are here to help. So very much looking forward to the 16th of June, where we will launch our report on the power plant. And yeah, thank you very much for the very timely discussion.
Thank you, Diana. Gregoire, over to you. Last word, 30 seconds.
I think 10 years ago, we would not be sitting here discussing about biodiversity loss. So I think we already make enormous progress. I think this round of discussions highlighted the challenges we have in communication, in mainstreaming a number of processes, but we are getting there, and I think that's the most important, is really to work together.
Thank you so much. Noor, last word, 30 seconds.
Thanks, Brian. Firstly, let's all get behind RePowerEU. It's a terrific package. Now it needs all stakeholders, all sectors to work together to make it a success. Number two, with the right mapping, yes, we can have nature-friendly renewables and we can accelerate their expansion here in Europe. We need more of the data sets and the science-led approach. And thirdly, Europe has a fantastic opportunity now to really get the approach right to siting renewables and to help ensure that that can be a blueprint which we hold up internationally for other countries to follow suit. So thanks very much.
No, thank you so much indeed. And just our final wrap up to say thanks to our studio audience as well, our audience for all the contributions today. Lots of questions, lots of interest there. And you can follow up. The full program will be published online as well. You can share that when you see it too. So follow EURACTIV for that. And to Zoran and Bonya and Anna, you don't see them there in the studio. This all comes together because of their work and the diligent efforts that they make over weeks before this takes place as well. So thanks to the team in the Brussels studio as well, and to the Nature Conservancy for their support for this program today and this partnership as well. Our thanks. So thanks to Jeremy, to Gregoire, Diana, Noor, Igor and Zelka for their contributions today. It was a good discussion. You can see we could spend another hour on this easily, thrashing out more detail. And so wherever you are today, from Washington here and in Brussels, I wish you a good day. Thank you.